Thank you for joining us and welcome to another edition of Answers Network. I'm your host, Alan Cardoza. And if this is your first time watching or listening to the show, know that every Monday from 11 a.m. to noon Pacific time, this show will bring on special guests that can inspire, educate, and in some cases entertain, while bringing answers and options to making our lives happier, healthier, and more successful. Now, I'd really appreciate it if you'd all do me a big favor. Please forward one of our shows to your social media groups. Sharing my show and others like it that focus on improved health, happiness, education, and success is one powerful way we can make a positive influence in the world together. Now, I know that I say that almost every week, but I truly mean it, is that we can make a difference, but it takes all of us. So please, if you can get this out to more people, know that we are all together going to be helping the world. Now, for those of you that are regular listeners of the show, you know that I'm someone who loves reading, especially psychological thrillers. I also love learning, which is one of the reasons I enjoy doing this show each week. My problem throughout the years that I've done this show was finding the time to do both, reading for pleasure and for knowledge. In our guest's latest novel, I got to do both. So joining us today is Gary Simons, MD. He's a retired neurosurgeon who's treated tens of thousands of patients. So with his knowledge as an educator, speaker, neurosurgeon, and burnout warrior, Gary has written a riveting psychological thriller entitled Death's Pale Flag that blends a harrowing peek behind the curtain of modern-day neurosurgery with a wondrous journey into the paranormal. Gary takes the reader on an immersive journey into the behind-the-scenes world of the operating room where few people have ever been. And if you have been there, probably weren't able to pay much attention to what was going on. Gary, welcome to Answers Network.
Thank you so much. I am deeply honored, particularly by that introduction.
Well, before we delve into your latest book, again, which I've enjoyed, please share a little bit about yourself and what motivated you to becoming a neurosurgeon, and how and when did the writing bug get you?
Oh my goodness. How long do we have? A few hours? I I think the neurosurgery one is an interesting story in that in medical school, I think I did what everybody in medical school seems to do. They go through multiple future versions of themselves. So I was going to be a family doc, then a cancer doc, and then a general surgeon, and then I was going to be a cardiothoracic surgeon, and I was all lined up to be trained in that. When the last month of medical school, I saw my first brain operation, and I said, "Oh my gosh, I got to do that. I can't." All of a sudden, I couldn't imagine doing anything else. And I switched horses in midstream, went running all over the country trying to find a place that would train me. And I always say, I tell pre-meds that and medical students, it's probably one of the dumbest things that a person could ever do, because I had no idea what I was getting myself into, which was quite a lot. But it's another interesting parable that I think it tells you the importance of following your heart, because I can't imagine doing anything else. It just was, once I was in it, I just, like I said, I couldn't imagine doing anything else. I couldn't have been a better career choice. But boy, I leapt in with both feet, totally blind.
And what about the writing bug?
I think, in medicine, you're always writing. It's one of the things I never tell you, but you're always writing. You're writing about the patients, you're writing in the chart. You're always, you have to write these scientific things, papers, and all that sort of stuff. So it's kind of nonstop, but it always feels a lot like book reports. And I always had a desire to get more into the fictional world. So but never really had the time. So I would jot down ideas and, have paper. In fact, I have, on my desk here, I have a bunch of papers, a very old fashioned, where I'm writing little notes about what I'm seeing and experiencing. So it was definitely always there. But when I stepped away from the operating table, all of a sudden, I actually had the time to do it. And all of a sudden, words just came pouring out. This book originally was about 260,000 words, and I had to really kind of cut it back because I recognized that nobody would even look at it on the shelf. So I had to work on doing that. But at least thus far, I've had no problems finding words. They just kind of spill out all over the page.
Yeah. So you started out writing War and Peace.
Yeah. But I'm not Tolstoy, and they're not going to be looking for that length of book from me, for sure.
Well, one of the things that you talk about, both in your prior books as well as your main character, goes through workplace burnout, and I know that you've studied a lot about it. So during those studies, and the burnout part in particular, talk a little bit about how constant trauma and tragedy affects the healthcare workers, and tell us why it's so critical to have a good support system, such as family, friends, loved ones, hobbies, and interests, when anybody is in this type of high-stress job.
Yeah, I think we were talking a little before the show, but I wrote about a fair amount and did a lot of work on the world of burnout and hopefully building resilience to burnout and wellness in healthcare workers, because I know healthcare, and I know healthcare workers, and that's all I did. I just spent my entire time around them. But I would argue that, the themes of everything we did in the previous books, they're pretty universal. And frankly, nowadays, I'm not even sure you need a high stress job. Not that any job isn't stressful. All jobs have their have their stressors and their challenges. And frankly, it's jobs and life that contribute to burnout. We always say that how your work goes, so goes your home life, but it goes vice versa. How your home life is going, so goes your work life in terms of the burnout world. So, but, particularly anymore, and I was listening to one of your shows with another guest who was mentioning very much the same thing. But man, this, we are in a fraught age right now. We have been through a pandemic, which, none of us have experienced before. We seem to be at each other's throat as a society, and all of a sudden they're telling us that AI is going to do this and do that to us. And I don't know, it just seems like it's coming fast and furious to us. So I think we're all in a setup position to be bombarded with stressors. And, the whole idea of burnout is that you have a certain amount of emotional, psychic energy, if you will, to face your stressors and tackle your stressors. But if they're coming at a point where they're exhausting the emotions beyond how quickly you can repair them or replenish them, that's when you start to burn out. And to go back to your question, finally, I would argue that things like strong support systems, friends, interests, things that give us meaning, things that give us charge, things that give us a sense of wonder and beauty and happiness and joy and calm and thoughtfulness, all those sort of things are the type of things that replenish the energy, that restore the batteries. Or we talk about it as maybe being like, a bank of energy that you either are withdrawing from or you're depositing in. And all these things, good relations, good friends, time to think for yourself, hobbies, things that occupy your mind, all those things are the things that are going to replenish that bank or put more deposits into that bank so that you can face the stressors, because those stressors aren't going away. In our books, we talk about the fact that we are not trying to make working in healthcare easier. Yes, there are many things that could be done to make it easier, but it's not going to happen overnight. And it's never going to be unicorns and cookies and rainbows. So our goal is really to get people in a position where they can, replenish that bank, make more deposits in the bank, so they can face the stressors and work their way through them and hopefully grow through them rather than be torn down.
Well, that's beautiful, and I couldn't have said it any better. As you were saying that, it reminded me that with one of my companies that I don't have anymore, but we worked with at-risk youth, and we had continuing education where we, inside the office, we would do reenactments, but it was based on therapeutic rapport, that we would talk about how do we feel after we've gone through this? How do we feel so that the employees, so that all of us could decompress a little bit, that we could feel like we had people that we could talk to? Because I don't think people realize, as you're saying, that, I love your analogy in regards to a bank, because I think, we can be continuing to put in good things in that bank. But if we keep putting bad stuff, that bag's going to fill up too, and we're going to have a bigger problem. So I like your analogy, and I couldn't agree more that we need to surround ourselves with the right people. And in the workplace, many of us spend 8-10 hours with these people, and I know that you did a lot of research. When you were doing your nonfiction books on workplace PTSD. What did you learn about the toxic work environment that surprised you the most?
I'm not sure if it surprised me the most, but it still opened my eyes a lot. And I think it's very, again, applicable to everybody, particularly in our society right now. But one of the biggest things that I think really opened my eyes, and that we work on whenever we're with a bunch of physicians and other healthcare workers, is one of the critical steps to building resilience is to have what I would call, or it's not what I call, but what the business calls self-compassion, and then permission, granting oneself permission for self-care. And the idea of self-compassion is the idea of being aware of yourself. It's emotional intelligence about yourself, being aware how you're doing, how you're faring, what's building you up, what's tearing you down, what's got you upset, what gets you happy, what makes you angry. And I think what happens so often is we get so focused on everything else and everyone else. And it's very easy in medicine because, you got patients there, and you can kind of just shift all your focus on those patients to the point where you just deny everything. And, classic thing is for us to go into work when we've got the flu, which is probably one of the dumbest things that you could possibly do. I spent most of my career up all night, about every third or every fourth night, and you just roll through and you work the whole next day. And so the whole culture is built around complete self-denial of any problem whatsoever. And it's very destructive, and it prevents you from doing the things, the self-care that you really need to do. And there's this tremendous force of guilt involved if you do start to self-care. If you say, boy, this is really bringing me down, I need to do some decompression, or I need to do some mindfulness, or I need to do whatever works. Oh no, I really shouldn't be doing that. I should be more focused on the patients, or more focused on the hospital, or whatever. And and you can only do that so long, and then the wheels start to come off. So I think, to me, that was the biggest realization of, wow, we all are doing this. And when I present it to a group of physicians, you just kind of start giving examples and giving examples, and you can see their eyes widen, and a lot of people nodding, and it is pretty universal.
And do you find that part of the reason that those of us or those people in those positions don't reach out for help as much as maybe they should is that we've become accustomed to being the one that the others come to for that help, which then psychologically, is there an issue of, if I now go to them for help, am I changing the way that they're thinking by going, well, wait a minute, if he doesn't know, I've been going to him all this time. Is there a psychological component there that I think also keeps us from asking for help?
Yeah, I think there's multiple psychological factors going on. I do think we like feeling indestructible, and I think we like feeling, that we're above the fray. And so I think, and this is, in the novel, the principal character falls into this trap, I think, as well, is just, if you start becoming the go-to person, well, I mean, it's ego gratifying, and it kind of reinforces any sort of hero feelings or sense that you have, and so I think you tend to do it more. Plus, in any workplace, I'm sure you've absolutely seen, but if you're competent and willing, the work automatically flows that way, and the same is going to go, for bringing solace to others as well. It's just more and more people are going to go that way, and then I think, again, that just builds an ego structure around yourself where it becomes hard to then admit, hey, I need help too. I need a break. I need to turn to somebody. So yeah, I agree.
Well, I'm going to ask you a little bit on the science side of it, because your book, Death's Pale Flag, it alludes to how thin the veil between life and death really is. Give us a few examples of the science on how constant exposure to death, dying, tragedy, human suffering, how it can actually affect our brain.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to get into the nitty gritty of some of the science of stress and uh, um, tragedy and vicarious traumatization and all the other terms that we have there, I think it's a fascinating field, a lot of which isn't really worked out. But I think it taps into one of my great fascinations, and one of the things I think it's important for everybody to recognize. I think there's a sense, because we always say, you're given a certain amount of neurons and you don't really make a lot of new neurons. So we have to be careful of the neurons that we have. Anyway, I think we have a sense sometimes that the brain is a computer, that all the wiring gets done as we're being produced, and then it's set, and that computer, all that wiring, it's like your old Mac, all that wiring is set, and that's the way it stays forever. And that couldn't be furthest from the truth. The brain is remarkably dynamic, and each nerve cell, each neuron, it will connect with thousands of others potentially, and is receiving thousands of inputs from others, each one. And so there are trillions of connections going on in the brain, and those are not hardwired, if you will. They are always changing, always changing. So you may strengthen connections, you may weaken connections, you may lose connections, you may gain connections, even at the individual, what we call a synapse, where one nerve cell is connecting with another, and messages are going through that connection. Just the way chemicals are released and the other side picks up those chemicals. Well, the receptors, the things that pick up those chemicals will change depending on circumstances, on what you're doing, what you're using, what you're not using. So if you are exposing your brain to learning all the time, you are going to strengthen all sorts of connections in your brain. If you expose your brain to wonderful things and wonder and happiness and gratitude and all that sort of thing, you are going to strengthen the positive sides of your brain, if you will, the things that bring you joy and pleasure and interest. They will self-generate, if you will. But the same thing goes in the other direction. And that is, if you're constantly exposing your brain to tragedy and suffering and mayhem and stress, you will alter the connectivity of the brain. You will lose various connections. You will strengthen other more negative connections potentially. So the actual brain changes when exposed constantly to terrible things. It even gets down to the genetic level, and we talk about this whole field that's, it's one of the newer fields of what they call epigenetics. And we know that certain levels of stress can actually affect what's called phosphorylation of our DNA. I mean, it can actually affect our genes. So yeah, all the way down to the very basic science, we know that those sort of things have a significant impact on our brain, and therefore how it functions and how the brain functions, and therefore how we respond and react to the world.
As you were saying that, I thought of the country of Bhutan. Some time ago, I studied a little bit about that country because I thought it was very interesting that they have a focus that's called gross national happiness. So our GNP is gross national product. Theirs is gross national happiness, where they have measurements that they do. So their focus as a government, they see their focus as how can we make our people happy? It seems like ours is just the opposite. They're so focused on division that, that happiness isn't anything like it. So I'm glad that you brought that up, because in regards to our happiness, be it meditation, be it getting outdoors, doing all of the things, probably the best thing that we can do for gross national happiness is turn off the news. Turn it off. And if enough of us do this, they won't feed it to us. But as long as we keep it on, as long as we have it on, if we have it on at the gym in public areas, I go into my gym and I ask them if there's a television nearby, or whichever one is closest. I said, could you please put that on something else? And they go, what would you like? Would you like sports? I said, I'd like anything other than national news. But I think that if we can all kind of start focusing on things like that, we're going to be able to make a difference.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Not to get political, so I'll stay away from that.
That's okay.
I fear that so many of our leaders, their principal concern is to just get reelected. So the focus on happiness and the well-being of our countrymen, country people, is not highest on the priority. But you're absolutely right. I've had to turn off stuff that I've listened to for decades. I can't do it anymore. I did find a website called Nice News, and that is on my morning reading list. I do look at Nice News, and you're absolutely right. Of course, but I mean, I agree that. So you must be right. But I always say, somebody's super brilliant when they agree with me. But back to the whole burnout and resilience business, it is important for people periodically to debrief, if you will, some of their stressors. It's really important every so often to get at some of the things that are particularly bothering you and just kind of deflate them. Although we always warn, it's not to sit there and complain about them, but it's to talk about how some stressor is really affecting you. How is it taking you down? Are there other ways that you can react? But anyway, we say that that's an effective tool, but you can't make that your principal tool because it's still focusing on the negatives. So we're always preaching to combat it with collecting of uplifts. And that is the things during the day that are neat, are magical, are fun, are happy, are humorous, whatever, things that bring you positive feelings and positive joy. And to collect those. And it's another interesting one of these brain phenomena and psychological phenomena that we tend to look for negative things. That's why the news presents us negative things. We tend to seek that out, and there's probably some survival benefit if you're, living in the wild and being chased by saber-toothed tigers and stuff. But in the end, far more powerful for your resilience and well-being is the collection of these uplifts. And at first, we're not good at looking for them. We're not good at absorbing them, if you will. And so you got to kind of train yourself. Look for some, write them down. I write them down on paper. Nowadays you could do it on your smartphone, but, find a few every day, write them down, seek them out, review them late at night just before you go to sleep so you can be thankful for them, but also, just remember, some good things happen today. But what happens is do that enough and the brain starts to look for it itself. And then you just start noticing, hey, that person smiled at me. They never smile at me. That person just smiled at me. It made me feel good, that sort of thing. So I agree 100% with you.
All right. We are talking with Dr. Gary Simons. His book is called Death's Pale Flag. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back. You're watching or listening to Answers Network.
Conflict International are experts at uncovering the truth. Our specialist team has decades of experience in providing a range of bespoke investigation and intelligence services to companies and individuals. Whether you need professional screening or background checks of employees, due diligence of potential clients or business partners, asset tracing services, or surveillance, Conflict International has a rapid response team on hand to get you to the heart of the matter. Our key strength is in our global capabilities. We can tap into an extensive network of trusted professional investigators based in most jurisdictions worldwide, enabling us to go almost anywhere a case takes us. Conflict International has decades of experience with a diverse range of skills among our team developed from backgrounds in military and security intelligence services, as well as practiced lawyers. Visit our website today at conflictinternational.com to find out more about our services. That's conflictinternational.com. Global reach, local knowledge.
And we're back. We are talking with neurosurgeon, Dr. Gary Simons, talking about his new novel, Death's Pale Flag. So Gary, in the novel, the hero is Ryan, and he literally has no time. His every waking second seems to be accounted for. Were you kind of writing about yourself at that time? And
yes, sorry to interrupt. In a way, yes. I think it's, people ask me about the character and I tell them, well, basically anything negative is a reflection of myself. Anything positive is kind of an amalgam of some truly great individuals I've worked with through the years, particularly my old Army buddies, I think. But the representation of that life, I think, is very accurate without a lot of hyperbole. in that certainly at a big major medical center, it can be a mile a minute. There is just a lot of wretched things going on to people, and there's only so many of you.
Yeah. So you've obviously now shifted and you're writing novels. How did you, what are some time management tips that you can put out there for someone either as a neurosurgeon that is spinning so many pie plates? And I use that analogy, and I think we're probably from about the same era, so you'll get it. But for some of my younger people, there used to be in a variety show, there would be a man that would start at one side of the table, and there'd be a plate and a pin standing straight up, about 12 inches high. And he'd spin a plate and he'd spin another one. He'd go all the way down this table. And at the far end where he started, that one would start to wobble. And he'd run back as fast as he could. He'd hit that one. And he'd go faster and faster and faster to see how many of them he could keep going. So, Gary, at what point do you have to just set one down before they all come crashing?
I can't necessarily tell you at what point. When you ask about time management, though, and I just in retrospect, I told you that in the end, I couldn't imagine doing anything else. Well, it helped, I think, being somewhat of an adrenaline junkie. Neurosurgery at times could feel very overwhelming. But if it slowed down, if there wasn't a crisis going, calling you down to the ER or rushing up to an ICU, I would start getting bored. And so, to a certain degree, some people do thrive on that madness, if you will, of it being super busy. But in the end, as a matter of fact, in our nonfiction books, we talk about time management being an important thing because there's so many time sumps nowadays. All you need to do is get on some site on the computer and or smartphone, and with next thing you know, 3 hours have elapsed as you've dove in deeper and deeper and deeper into some esoterica or into some political screed or whatever. But even without doing that, the work demands in the electronic era are such that it just feels like everything's supposed to be immediate. And we would tell you, for example, just dealing with emails. I see so many colleagues, the minute an email comes in, they have their alerts on, and next thing you know it, they're answering that email, breaking whatever activity they're in the middle of, and therefore breaking their concentration and their focus, which they're going to have to reestablish. So something as simple as bunching your attention to emails and just recognizing that it is a rare day when an email is going to stop the world, so we would say, dedicate certain times of the day. These are the times I'm going to figure out my emails, and then you can prioritize which emails are super important and time dependent versus the ones that are not so, and get that, bunch that stuff together, for example. And just as an example, I think another thing in time management that we forget is our systems tend to have a certain amount of redundancy, meaning people who can help us. It isn't always that we are the lone cowboy out there on the front lines, but we sometimes forget, or we're shy to ask for help or suggestions. And I think, just looking around and recognizing that you're doing these things as a team goes a long way.
I'll bet.
I think there's a lot of strategies, and these time management books and time management pieces that you'll see on the internet, I think are all very worthwhile looking at and seeing how you can apply them to your own life.
Well, your book does an outstanding job of showcasing just how stressful the job can affect the relationship and the different ways in which both partners can address issues and try to work through them, or in some cases, just ignore them. Um, who was that for you? Who helped you work through some of yours?
Um, well, the ghost. No, I'm only kidding. There are ghosts in the book, but I haven't experienced any. Obviously, my wife is. I kind of fatigue at people calling her a saint. It kind of implies that she's living with the devil, and but everybody calls her a saint, and she is a person of infinite patience and support, and that certainly helped me and helped keep me grounded. As did my kids, my friends. I definitely have a strong network of relationships that are very important to me. And it's interesting, Alan, that one of the things that we know in the burnout world, particularly in men, even more than women, is once you kind of enter middle age, you tend to constrict your relationships, your friend circle significantly. So if you grab a bunch of late middle-aged men, they often will, and you say, name the really close friends you have or close relationships. They often will be able to do it on one hand or just a few fingers. And we know that is potentially harmful in so many ways. Even in some of your correspondence, before the show, you had mentioned Alzheimer's. And we know that one of the correlates to Alzheimer's is a low number of relationships, or vice versa. It seems to be protective to have a number of friends and relations that you really care about and interact with. So, get back to that the way that the brain is malleable and plastic. It's not hardwired. So you've got to treat it. And one of the ways is to have lots of relationships and friends that matter to you, and to engage with them.
Well, couldn't agree more. We have some listener questions that have come in. And again, I want to thank those that take the time to send these in. Oftentimes they're teachers or people that are working during the day. So they'll send a question in sometimes from the night before or sometimes during the show. And I just want to thank them for taking the time to do this. I think so many people gain further benefit from it just by being able to see that sometimes the question ends up being something, and I'll get somebody else that'll contact me the following week saying, hey, that question from Bill in Santa Monica, it was perfect. It was exactly what I was thinking. So again, for those that's sending them in, thank you. Now this one reads, it says, like Alan, I enjoy reading novels that I feel I also learn something, especially when it's about a subject that I knew little or nothing about before. How does Death's Pale Flag differ from other medical thrillers in terms of its plot and narrative style? This is from Kathy in Colorado.
Probably the other medical thrillers were written by much more accomplished novel writers, number one. But this one got written by a accomplished. I would allow myself to call myself an accomplished neurosurgeon simply by volume, if not quality. And so in this book, you are getting the glimpses, or really it's much more than glimpses, of the neurosurgical world, the brain surgery world, trauma, coming into the trauma bays, sick patients in the ICUs. I think really important as well, talking to the patients and their families and what that involves. And you're getting it right out of the horse's mouth. In fact, one of my concerns was it too much neurosurgery and too little novel? But I really wanted to put the high-speed craniotome in your hands and have you take the skull apart and start operating on the patient. And I wanted you sitting down with a bereaved family and talking about all the implications of what's happened with the patient's families. And I think those are very true to heart. I think the conversations in the OR and around and with the patients and their families, I think they're very all true to what's real out there. I was encouraged to leave out some of the swearing, so I did cut the swearing down a certain amount, because you can get kind of salty in that world. But so I would say those are some of the things that I bring to the table. And then I think I have not seen this twist before, where where the surgeon, who's very much immersed in a scientific world, a heavily scientific world, is now having to think about a supernatural or paranormal or spiritual, fantastical, whatever word you want, world. And that's an interface that's always interested me. So that's how it got in there. But I don't think there's a lot that have done that.
Well, I think, and thank you for that. I think you're being very modest in the sense, I think it is very well written, and there is a sense of suspense. There's a sense of, at times, feeling like you're there. You're there. You're just sort of immersed in it, and I know that. I mean, some of my favorite books. One of the things that I like about Clive Cussler is I always come away with knowing something, and it's either in the protagonist or it's in, the whoever the villain is, but there's something that they're interested in, and it might be wine, it might be old cars. It, in most of his books has to do with underwater things. So I always feel like I've learned something. So, and again, and that's, I think Clive Cussler is one of our greatest writers out there. So again, I think that for anybody out there, this is that wonderful molding of two areas where you feel like you're learning, and at the same time, you want to know what's going to happen next. And I think that's what the goal should be. So I thank you for that.
Well, you're too kind. I appreciate it. There's a whole series of books that I love. They're an English writer, and they made them into a TV series actually. But it's Lovejoy Mysteries, and in the Lovejoy Mysteries series, the main protagonist is an antiques dealer of all things. But the novels are infused with all this information about antiques and the history behind certain objects through the ages and stuff. So it's funny. Each one really is, you get this a in-depth look at certain of these antique markets, if you will.
Well, yeah, it's if I feel like reading something about it's more law enforcement related and stuff. Some of the books that I've read that are written by a detective, or by a private detective, or by a former police officer or something. I love the detail that it goes into. Where, wow, I didn't, So it's something that you feel like you walked away with. But now, so to be honest. Which of you found more fun, writing your nonfiction books or telling the ghost stories in your fiction book?
Yeah, that one's easy. It is so much fun writing a novel. It is just a blast. I think the nonfiction, no matter what, always felt like book reports to me. And I'd never liked doing book reports. I didn't like doing papers in college. And so it was always a labor. But it's just, and I think, again, my world was very concrete. You stayed within the navigational beacons as much as you could, because people depended on it, and you're basing things on evidence-based research and all this sort of stuff. You just really had to stay true to things. And that's what happened with the book. I mean, it went in all sorts of directions. There were all sorts of characters that eventually made it to the cutting room floor, because all of a sudden, the doors were blown wide open, and you could run with it in any direction you wanted, which was just sheer joy. And I guess in the end, when you're writing these things, hopefully you're enjoying it, or else I can't imagine that it comes out as interesting.
Yeah, I would agree with that. We've got another question, comment that has come in. This one reads, without giving anything away, are there any thought-provoking ethical dilemmas or moral questions raised in your new book? And if so, what might they be?
Yeah, I think, there are plenty. You and I were talking before your show, just about modern healthcare and modern pharmaceuticals. So, anytime you deal with the healthcare world, particularly, way up in that kind of rarefied world of the super sick and all this stuff, there's plenty of ethical things that just come popping out. I think one of the easier ones, which I still don't really understand in myself, but is, for example, just this idea of working insane hours, working through the night, and then going back and then the next morning with little or no sleep, and operating again on people's brains. I mean, we did it my whole career. That's how we were trained. But I'm not sure that's the right thing to be doing, when you're at all incapacitated or not firing at 100%. I'm not sure that's the right thing to be putting onto your patients. So stuff like that really comes up. I think another one that I'm alluding to in the book, but this may be more the protagonist's problems than his partner's problems, but there's an inference that not all his partners are up to snuff. Mm-hmm. And, there's some reality to that too, but where do you draw the line? I mean, if somebody is very good, that means there's going to be a lot of people not quite as good as them. And where do you draw the line and say, well, that's not good enough? And how do you police that in the healthcare system? How do you police that your providers are actually decent enough? We theoretically have boards and exams and stuff, but I'm not sure that assures anything. So yeah, I know you can dig into almost any of the vignettes in the book, and I think you could come up with some interesting ones. Another one, frankly, is, and this is done in the book, but is kind of a euthanasia that goes on in hospitals now. They're not sanctioned euthanasias, but they call it comfort care, where it's decided that, no more effort is going to be put into keeping somebody alive, but they're not going to kind of die on their own for a while at least. And sometimes it's hastened by giving a certain amount of sedatives and painkillers, and that's got some real gray zones as well, as happens in the book. So yeah, we got plenty in there.
Well, it's interesting that when you were saying that, I was thinking about pilots, and they have a rule that if they flew for X amount of hours the day before, they have to have X amount of sleep before they're allowed to fly again. And maybe they should think about that with surgeons as well, if you're going to be working on somebody's brain. Now, we've only got about a minute, and I've got another question that's just come in. This one reads, I'm a naturopathic doctor working on my first book that I would also like to be educational, inspirational, and suspenseful. Can you share any insights into the research or inspiration behind Death's Pale Flag that you drew upon while writing the book? And this is from Mark in Los Angeles.
Yeah, and always happy to talk to Mark in Los Angeles. If he ever wants to contact me through my website, I would be happy to share with him what I did. But I tried in many ways to represent, the experiences that I had, or amalgams of experiences and patients and their families and stuff, because I thought it was real important, particularly to tell their side of the story. I think, in some ways, the details of neurosurgery, they might be interesting, but really to me, it was the impact and the interfaces with the actual people. And that might be one of the ways to really make sure that you're being very true to your subject, is focus less on the nuts and bolts and more on the impact and the effects and what you're doing with other people and how they respond.
Well, Gary, when we started this and I asked you the first question and you said, how much time do we have? Well, I wish that we had more. Thank you. This has been wonderful. For everybody out there, again, the book, which is Death's Pale Flag, great book, especially for those of us that want to be educated as well as entertained. And also, Gary, you said you may have something coming up soon. Please let my producer know. Would love to have you back. This has been wonderful. And thank you so much, not only for what you've done as a neurosurgeon, but for now sharing with us the intricate details of what really goes on there.
Well, Alan, we were talking about how you make deposits in your psychic or your emotional bank, and being a guest with you is certainly doing it for me. So I am very appreciative and very honored that you've had me. This has been a delight.
Well, thank you. Now, for everybody out there, please visit our archives of past interviews at answers.network. Or just subscribe to the show. You can do it through Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, SoundCloud, YouTube if you want to see us rather than just hear, Rumble, Spreaker, and many other popular podcast platforms. If you like what you hear, please leave a review. I want you to know that it helps us reach more people, and we greatly appreciate it. The next time you're on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter, please remember, stop by our page, check out some of our latest posts. If you like them, like us, and spread the word. For everybody out there, be good human beings, and be with us again next week on Answers Network.
You're listening to Answers Network with Alan Cardoza, only on LA Talk Radio.